Hi, everybody. Hello. It's so nice to see you here tonight. Thank you for coming. It's funny, you see those clips and they go by in like 2 seconds at a time. You see 5 seconds, I see 5 years to get to it. And maybe I'll just tell you about one of them because it's a little mysterious and it's hard to see them one after the other, and then I'll get into what I really came to talk tonight about. But maybe you noticed the one with the man, just his head, and there's like a film playing on the head. And I don't know if you could tell that was his old Civil War clip, but that's what he had drilled into his head. And where this comes from is I got involved in doing a project about the 150th anniversary of the Civil War a few years ago. And while I was working on that, I decided to think about what happened to doctors and nurses and ideas of healing in the context of war, what goes on. And I went to, we have a Civil War medicine museum, which if you're ever in Frederick, Maryland, go see. It's an amazing museum. And you walk into one of the rooms, and the room is entirely filled with portraits of people who'd had amputations, because it turns out that the signature wound of that war were amputations, and after the war, our streets were filled with soldiers coming home that way. And I happened to go in there precisely at the time when our war in Iraq had heated up, and if you recall back in the early parts of that year, many of our soldiers were coming home without their limbs. And so I decided in one of those split seconds that sometimes artists do in research, I just said, oh, I'm gonna make this be about both wars, and I'll have the characters time travel between the wars. I expected to find out, when I entered the research about all this, I thought returning soldiers would have had very different experiences. One of the things, of course, we've all been living with is how few of us are affected by our wars now within our own families. But in the Civil War, that was not the case. Almost everybody was involved, and everybody's family was involved. So I anticipated that I would find out that people would come home and sort of be embraced and it was all going to be okay. No, that is not what happened. It was just as hard to come home. And what the research showed me was, for example, the relationship between the rise of asylums and the beginning of kind of a mental health movement in our country coincides with the return of these soldiers, many of whom had to go into the asylums because they could not handle what had happened to them. What had happened in this particular story of this particular person is that, and he wasn't the only one, families would keep their loved ones locked up, this man in an attic, because that was the only way they could handle the terror that this person brought home with them. The Ku Klux Klan is an outcome of the war, because so many Confederate soldiers used to living in the woods wanted to stay in the woods. And of course, those of us in the West, and I'm a newcomer to the West in a way, relative newcomer, we know that a lot of Civil War soldiers made their way west for the Indian Wars. So that is just a little moment where the audience wanders. Each of the characters are on a kind of display and a kind of set of installations before the show begins. And you could come into this attic room and watch this man in this chair with this film of the war going. That's just a small example of what I mean by how much research goes into this one little moment and how grateful I am to be here to begin research on a new project. I'm going to get into that later, but first I want to thank Karina Lesser for making this all possible, the wonderful faculty I met today and I'll be meeting tomorrow, and some terrific students I got to work with yesterday. They actually embarked on the first workshop that I've been working on with this new work, so I'm very grateful. But I thought what we could do is I could talk to you a little bit about some of frameworks for thinking that I've been developing over the years. You probably know about design thinking, kind of the current way people are trying to work with design in the context of communities and cities. I think the thing should be choreographic thinking. That should be the next big thing, because everything is in motion. Everything is in motion. Our institutions are in motion. The world under our feet is in motion. The the rapidness of change, the way things are happening, swirling around us. I really deeply believe if people had access to the way choreographers think, not just make work, but think, could be useful. And some of what I want to do are just frameworks of thought that have emerged out of the work that I've been doing all these years. I'm going to stop partway through to give you a chance to ask questions, but also to talk among yourselves, to think about how you're taking in all of this. So I looked at the map today. I was born about 40 miles from here, which I didn't realize I was so close. I might have made a pilgrimage. And I say all this because the house I went home to from the hospital was in Watts, and then my family moved to Venice when it was still just a field. Like, my memory of Venice is going to the chicken farm on Fridays when my mom got the Friday night chicken, and she'd bring home the chicken, which she would pluck, and I would get all the feathers. So I know it's hard to imagine Venice like that, but so that is it in my memory. We moved when I was 4, so what I'm about to tell you I know happened when I was very young, but I actually had nightmares in that period. And it's funny to me now when I think about the nightmares, because I'm quite a sort of a conceptual narrative artist, but my nightmares were really abstract. The dots were coming for me. The dots, these swirling, massive things would be coming after me, and I would wake up screaming, and my mom would come into the room, and, she had, as mothers have, that way of, touching you just right, and all would be well in the world. I mention the dots because now I see the world in dots. It may be the influence of the scientists that I've gotten to work with the last 15 years, the biologists who are busy with, teeny, 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 tiny molecular things, or the physicists in their nano world. But the world is in dots. I am sometimes credited with the idea that old people could dance. Now, this is really silly. Old people have been dancing for thousands and thousands of years. But I just happen to remember it in a little tiny moment in history when old people, in a particular form of dance, in a particular part of the world, in a particular kind of stage, didn't dance. What happened is I connected some dots. I connected the fact that my mother had died and I needed old people to be in a piece so I could sort of reflect on what had happened to me. I was desperate for that, and I was dancing, and so I put together a line between old people dancing and dance. And once you have a line, you start to see something. Other people. Now, I wasn't the only person. Bill T. put his grandmother on stage. Lots of people were starting to explore. Lots of people had done it before me. But you started to see these lines drawing, and pretty soon there was a shape, enough of a shape that we could change the field. We could say, you know what? It's a good idea to have intergenerational people dancing. You couldn't see it when it was just dots. You needed the shape. So then I started working with the physicists, and any artist who works with physicists, you'll eventually find the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Some of you, we probably have some physicists in the house. I'm going to do real damage to the idea, but hang in there with me. In the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, he says something like this: if you measure the shape of something, you will not be able to capture its velocity. If you measure its velocity or its momentum or its speed, you will not be able to find its shape. Isn't that cool? I think that's really interesting. You can have the shape or you can have the momentum. Dancers come that way. They tend to be shape dancers or momentum dancers. You can learn to be both, but it's hard. I think our institutions are like this: shape or momentum. And for too many of our institutions, we're hanging on to our shape And we can't break it apart enough to feel the momentum and the urgency of the times we are in. And what's so weird about this is that, if you break your shape down, you're not losing. You get back into all the pieces again, and you get to rebuild it in a way that is flexible and right for this particular time we're in. But if it's only momentum, you cannot see it. You can feel it. You can feel it, but you can't see it. So I'm a big advocate that we think about shape and momentum as a way of thinking about change. So I was spouting this, as I come to, because I'm really excited about this idea. And I was in a faculty meeting at my university. I'm only recently an academic. It's pretty wild. It's talk about shape and momentum. It's a very different shape for me. But somebody said to me, okay, Liz, that's all very interesting, but we're not going to lose the essentials, are we? Like when we go back into the dots, we're not going to lose the essentials. I said, well, I don't know. Because here's an essential. I was raised as a classical dancer first. And in classical dance, ballet in my case, you are told that if you study and learn classical dance, you can do anything. Get that in you, and you can do anything. Well, guess what? They're probably half of the world's dances I cannot do. I'm like way up here, and they're way down here. You know what I mean? I know the dancers know what I'm talking about. I mean, I can teach myself, but I have to go through a molecular change from being way up here to be able to find that other place. So no, it's not true if you study classicism that you can do everything. If you study classicism, you can do classicism, and that's a good thing, but it's not everything. This is a shape and momentum question, isn't it? It's interesting, I think. So I'm going to stick with the biography, in part because what I love looking out at this audience is we've got a wonderful range of age here, and I particularly want anybody younger than 30 to know that I wasn't born like this, that I became this, and that there's a lot of stuff on the way. So I just want to talk about two little moments in my own biography that I think address some of the concerns that I want to get at later. First is, when I was 14, I got to dance for President Kennedy. I was part of a dance troupe from the National Music Camp, and off we went, and Mrs. Kennedy had established this summer arts program on the lawn for the president. Just take that in. And we performed, and then we got to have a meal in the White House, and we stayed at nearby Fort Belvoir, and it was really interesting. There's a little side note. We toured first to the Ford Museum, Henry Ford Museum, and when my father heard that we were going to perform at the Ford Museum, he called up the National Music Camp, and he said I couldn't be in it. And the camp said, why? And he said, well, because he's anti-Semitic and he's a racist, and she's not allowed to perform in places like that. The National Music Camp was like, what? We worked it out. I don't know how. I think he basically just needed to make his case because I was allowed to do that. But it is interesting, and I'm going to return to that question. I laugh about it lightly, about my wonderful father and how he was always doing that, but we can think about what the implications are of that. So I performed for President Kennedy, met him. I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time, came back from that performance, and my city was about to erupt in the civil rights movement. Marches everywhere. My parents, who believed in education beyond everything else, pulled me out of school and sent me to something called Freedom Schools, which is an incredible movement, which rather undocumented. It took different forms in different parts of the country. In Milwaukee, it was a once-a-week thing, so it's not like they pulled me out forever, but one day a week we boycotted regular school and went to these freedom schools where we learned all kinds of things, and what was also, because Milwaukee was an incredibly segregated city, a place where actually desegregation took place just because of who came to the freedom schools. I was at the time learning the bluebird variation, So if I went to Freedom School during the day and then went to my ballet class and was learning the Bluebird, well, what do you think happened? I had no way to hold both those things. And at the time, I didn't know about shape and momentum. And I didn't know that you could change things. So I quit dancing. And off I went to try to do some other things. What I learned really quickly, really within 3 to 4 years, is that every field was troubled, every field was bulky, every field was problematic. It wasn't dance that was the problem, it was our structures that were the problem, the frail structures that human beings invent in order to try to make things move along. And once I understood that, I could go back to dancing and say, okay, I'm gonna make it work in dance. So now there's one more little biography to catch you up on, and I referenced it earlier, and that is that when I was in my late 20s, my mom was diagnosed with a virulent form of cancer. I left graduate school, went home to be with her for the last couple months of her life, and determined while I was going through this horrendous event that I would make a dance about it. Now, I had already started a company, I'd begun a school. We were beginning to start to move dance pieces around. I had no idea how to do this. But I had this notion that I needed to find some old people because I wanted to make a dance in which my mother was welcome to whatever she was going or had gone to. And somehow I pictured, oh, this is old. So I did find a place in Washington, D.C. where I was living at the time after left Wisconsin, came back to Washington. I'm not going to go into everything that happened there, but I just want you to know that I went to visit the Roosevelt Hotel for Senior Citizens, told them I wanted to teach dance to old people, because I figured if I taught there, after a while I could get some of them to be in the piece. And the person running the place just laughed at me. You have to picture 1975, pre-jogging. The United States, none of this exercise stuff. Not half-nude people running outside, pushing against lampposts. No, nothing like that. And old people entirely warehoused. I mean, now you see us everywhere. But really, it wasn't like that. So she thought I was crazy, but she had lost her entertainment for Thursday nights, and she said I could do whatever I wanted, and she would pay me $5 a week. And I went, I figured I would, it was not unlike this, except we were in the bingo room, but I mean, the setup was the same. I performed a little bit, and I said, now it's your turn, and we're gonna exercise, and nobody would do anything with me. I thought, okay, they can't hear me. I started yelling, you could, come on, everybody, do this. And then I just started to run back and forth in front of them, and their heads went like that. I said, great, we're exercising, like that. In that moment, I did have this sense that my world was about to change, that everything I knew up to that point about dancing and everything I knew about the human body and aging was going to change. I stayed there for 10 years. And this is one of the things that I want to say tonight. We experience transformation like that, but that's not how transformation happens. You prepare the ground, you prepare the work, you do all this work, and then yes, when the conditions are set, yes, maybe there's that change, that understanding, that flick of, oh my God, it could be different. My life at the Roosevelt was an amazing thing. I was very, very amazed at what I got to learn there. I was a young choreographer, so we formed a little company with old people and a few of the younger dancers that I was also working with at the time, and we would we'd go into the schools and we would go to other senior centers. We would do little dances based on the lives of the people in the company, the older people. This was a new idea for me. Like, where were the stories coming from for dance? I mean, how many Swan Lakes were you going to see? Were there some other stories? And it turns out this place where I was once a week was full of stories. One of the guys, big guy, was a former naval commander, and his name was John. And one of the other guys, Harry, had been a lumberman in northern Michigan. And we had this really silly little dance we did for the schools. The old people would all line up across the stage, and we'd do a little thing about being a lumberman. I forget what that part was. And then Harry would go 1, 2, 3, timber, and all the old people would fall down. Well, the children just could not get enough of this. They just and then the old people would get up and on we'd go with some of the things. I said I was a new choreographer. I was just learning, but did give me a chance to be very literal and very legible. Very useful tools for choreographers who otherwise are being forced to be abstract every single second. So this was really good. So after we were performing this for about a month, this guy, John, the naval commander, comes up to me after the show and he said, Liz, I want you to know I took a bath. I said, good. Right. Okay. But he repeated himself. And I have to say, I was beginning to learn that if I just listened long enough, all kinds of things would come up that I just didn't know. So I just waited him out. And then he said it again, and then he said, okay, I just want you to know that for the last few years, I've only been able to shower. But since I've been falling like that tree, I can get in and out of the tub now. Pretty interesting, huh? This is a guy who would never go to therapy. Forget it. Would rather stand in the shower the rest of his life than go to therapy and learn how to get up and down off the ground. But being a tree in his friend's story reenacts some deep, deep communal thing that allows his body to completely change. This is when I'm starting to realize that actually all these skills that we've been amassing in technique classes and all these skills we've been amassing in what we're doing in our art classes, that we're only sharing one teeny tiny bit of it when we do our performances. And we're missing like all the rest of it. Like, how crazy was that? So at about that time, people started coming to me and they were saying things like this, because as I said, we were starting to tour, so we were getting around and doing stuff. Liz, the dances that your company does on formal stages like the Kennedy Center, that's up here. And the stuff you're doing in the nursing homes and seniors, oh, okay, I guess you like to do it, but that's down here. This is the art, this is whatever. Call it social work, call it therapy, whatever. Or people were doing this. And they were saying, wait a minute, the stuff up here, that stuff in community, all that, that's fantastic. Why are you still bothering to do the stage work? It's old, it's white, it's European, it's male. It's like, why are you doing that? Why would I want to choose? What an impoverished way of thinking that my society would expect me to choose between those two worlds. It seemed completely stupid to me, since they both were so important, so powerful, so challenging, and they fed each other every day. So I did this, which is really easy to do with my hands. See? And determined that I was going to find a way to live between these worlds, or, if you make it a circle, they're right next door to each other, which they frequently are. But to do that. Now, once I started determining this, I have to say I began to realize that we create hierarchies about everything. Nurture, rigor. Well, let's say we create, let me talk at first about dichotomies, that we create dichotomies, nurture or rigor, individual or collective. Collaborative or silos, or now everything's going to get all mixed up. It's like the dichotomies are constant. And I just keep saying every time I hear one, flip it, and take a look and see where you stand, because generally speaking, you're going to want access to one end or the other at some point. So even in rehearsals, highly collaborative. You come into a rehearsal, so much going on, chaos, all this, and then the next second, I might stand up and say, okay, you go there, and now we're in an authoritarian regime. Next door, boom, just like that. That's what being on the horizontal allows. It means that I don't have to be authoritarian when there's no need to be, when I don't want to be, when it's irrelevant, and when it's the stupidest form of being you could possibly be. And I can find all these other ways of thinking. Here's another thing about the difference. In this world, in a world like this, hierarchy, if you want to make distinctions, you literally have to put the thing down that you are distinguishing from. So even if it's as small a nuance as the difference between, say, dance therapy and community-based dance, which are two very different things, if you're going to live in a hierarchy, one of them is going to be better than the other in such a way that you spend a lot of time feeling bruised or isolated. But if you flip it, you live on the horizontal, you can see that making distinctions is creative, and you can do it without rancor. Because I think making distinctions is one of the most creative things we do. So to try to figure out how to live this way turned out to be a major part of the work that I continue to do. One last thing on the hierarchy before I leave it is, in this world, this is good, and this is not good. Based on what? Based on what? Whose idea? Who set that up? Who said that's the way it should be? In fact, it leads to very lazy thinking. Go this way. Now you have the problem. What's excellent? Turns out, the cutting edge is not just at BAM in the next wave. In fact, it hardly is. But cutting edge is in second grade classrooms. We know that. We've been there. We've seen it. Cutting edge went on yesterday in rehearsal in our classroom here. So what happens when you flip things this way, first of all, it's so incredibly challenging every single second to figure out what is working, what's not working, why is it working, and I love that challenge. It means that context matters. Context helps us understand that. And again, we have a chance, I think, at flipping into between shape and momentum, but that's sort of, so, yeah. I think I'm going to leave the horizontal for a moment. Can I do one more, and then I'm going to give you a chance to think a little bit among yourselves. But allow me, if you can, I'll just take a drink. Oh, I'm glad I took a drink because I thought of one more thing I wanted to tell you. So one of my colleagues at ASU is a man named Brian Brayboy. He runs our Indigenous programs. And it's been really, really wonderful to get to know him. And he has a definition of aesthetics, which goes, what a people think is good, beautiful, and true. So the good, beautiful, true part, we've known that. That's kind of from the Greeks. It's been passed down, those ideas of good, beauty, and truth that kind of come along with us. But when Brian Brayboy, who's a Lumbee Indian from North Carolina, when he says, what a people thinks, now that gives you a sense of something, doesn't it? Something really powerful. It made me think about things like my own, it's hardly suffering compared to how some people have suffered in this country, but my own suffering of living a narrative artist in a life of abstract, when the downtown, when a particular idea of dance, a particular tribe of dance says this is what a people thinks is good, beautiful, and true, and it's good for the whole country. It's good for the whole world. It's hard to push against that. So I've been thinking, what does it mean if we had aesthetic equity? Like, what would it mean if we did that? If you did this, and you said, now, what a people think is good, beautiful, and true, what do people think is good, beautiful, and true, what do people think is good, beautiful, and true? What if we did that? What would it take? Wouldn't it be glorious? Wouldn't it be amazing? And you can also see now how our own fragile departments and our own universities are struggling to try to create that possibility. You can see that our shapes are wrong in order to support that idea. But I can see it, and I can feel it, and I can start to see how the shape can go. I'm going to just tell you one, let's see, what time is it? Quarter of, yeah, I'm okay. One more idea. Sort of two ways into this. One way is this. What do you think the artists were doing in a culture that believes that the universe was born on the back of a turtle? What do you think the artists were doing in a culture that believed that the universe is a clock? What are the artists doing when we think the culture is, I don't know, a network? Or the culture is God's going to create the world, but God is the world, and so there's no room for God to create the world. So for God to create the world, God has to contract. God contracts, and now there's a world. What are the artists doing when that's the story? I ask this because when I began working on with the scientists on the genomics project, I got very involved with all these geneticists and also with what genetic engineering is. You know, you take things apart, you put them back together in some new ways, and you see what you've made. Sounds a lot like postmodernism, doesn't it? Doesn't it? And it made me start to wonder, well, what's our responsibility? Has postmodernism contributed to genetic engineering? Because I think artists, we like to think that we're not the problem. We like to think actually that we can comment on the problem without being the problem. I started wondering, well, wait, where are we in this problem? So now come with me with this thing. I got a call from the woman who was not yet the dean of the Harvard Law School, but became that dean, Martha Minow. I wanted me to do a piece in honor of the 60th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials. Harvard was hosting that anniversary, and she put it to me this way. She said about 350 people who deal with genocide in the courts are going to be here. They think about genocide 24/7, 365 days a year. And then she said, but I don't think they think about the body. So I initially turned her down because I thought, I just really didn't know if we could do that. But she really persisted, and she said she would help me with the research, which was really a good thing. And I'm so glad I agreed, because we went into an intense period because the time frame was short. Normally I had to take years, but we only had a summer. And among the things that she led us to, she had done a lot of work with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And in order for them to do their work, and there may be South Africans here in the room. Do we have some here? Or people involved with that? I know that it's not perfect, everything that happened. And sometimes the way I talk about it, I think it's amazing. But what they did is they had four definitions of truth. And that's how they were able to work through the relationships that had developed with neighbor to neighbor. The four definitions of truth for them were: there's the factual truth, what actually happened. There's the forensic truth, what the bones have to tell you. There's the narrative truth, which is each person telling their own story in their own manner. And then there was something they called social truth. I had a lot of trouble understanding what that last one was until I was living in Baltimore during the uprising a few years ago. I hadn't yet moved to the Southwest. And in Baltimore during the uprising, you could really see why you needed four definitions of truth. We know that Freddie Gray, here's the facts, he got into a van, he could walk. He got out of the van, he could not. We see it. We see him already struggling to get into the van. But we know from after his death, the forensics, the lead levels in Freddie Gray's body off the charts. Unacceptable. It's there, it's in the bones. It's truth. There's no way not to see it. It's the truth. The narrative truth, yes. Everybody wanted to talk about Freddie Gray. Every neighbor he had, his family, people on the street, all the news people that came from all over the country to swarm down on Baltimore. Everybody had a story. But what was the social truth? And the social truth was watching the city try to figure out what to do next. Who was talking to who? Where was it? Where were the artists who were doing just, the artists in the library were the best things because they were the only places where people could come together and actually try to figure it out. So take the word healing. Let's heal. Turns out, when you're trying to work through social truth, people don't agree on what that word means. A lot of people of color didn't want to heal. What did that mean? Going back to the way it was? No, unacceptable. So social truth takes time, and it needs interlocutors like artists in spaces like libraries to work itself out. So I was very taken by this idea of multiple definitions of truth. And I've gone on to think about that. If you know me at all, you know that I'm an obsessive person about creative tools. I'm constantly organizing my own history and other people's if they tell me anything about what's the artistic tool that you could see there and practice and test and see how it works. One of mine is multiple words for the same thing. I feel really strongly that that's an incredibly creative act. So what's my responsibility in a time of fake news? What is my responsibility when some of the most creative things I believe in the hands of somebody else, turn into something like, well, there's no truth, or it's all fake? How does that work? That's one of my big questions right now. How does it work? What is our accountability? Where is our accountability? I have some ideas. I won't go into it now about how I'm working on it, but I am thinking hard because I think the reckoning that we're experiencing, not just around sexual harassment, but the reckonings that we're experiencing have to do with this question about where is accountability and how do we hold ourselves to it. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute because I've talked a lot and ask you this. I know if I say, hey, does anybody have any questions? Usually people have to take a minute. Why don't you talk to each other for a minute about what you've heard, if there's anything that's caught your attention, if there's anything you want to challenge, if there's something you're excited about. Really, really turn to somebody and talk. And if you feel alone, if you're not by somebody, just get up and move. It's good. Move your bodies. It's good. But I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and then I'd love to hear what you're talking about or take some questions, and then I'll get into why I'm really here. Okay, so go ahead. Chat. Thank you, that was nice to see. So this would be a great time if you have comments and or if you reflection or if you want to ask a question or if there's something on your mind. We've got people with microphones, so just raise your hand. Hi, we'd really love to hear from you. I certainly would be interested in what you're thinking.
We really like the idea of turning hierarchy on its side. I live in a retirement community of retired clergy and social activists, and I think there are things about religious institutions that could land on their sides very easily.
I agree with you. Yeah, did you have a comment too? Were you, oh, no.
All three of you.
Yeah. I was at something called the Sparrow Seminar run by Bill Putnam. Some of you might know him. He's the bowling alone guy. More Americans are bowling, but bowling in separate groups. And he had a seminar for a couple of weekends. And one of the weekends was going to be about religion. And a man named, I'm not going to bring his name up, but he runs a mega church in Texas. And he did, what is it? I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. But he gets up, and he's African American, and the group is a mix of people, and he's about ready to start, and one of the other African Americans in the group said, preach to us, brother, preach. And he said, oh, no, I don't preach anymore. I'm in relationship with my congregation. And I think he's suggesting this, and it ties to my rabbi's rabbi is a guy named Larry Hoffman, who believes that the Jews have changed their idea of God 4 times in our history, and we're in the midst of one. And he says, again, it's moving from an authoritarian God to a relational God, and that it's happening. It's kind of a form of social truth, isn't it, as we kind of work those things out, yeah.
I'm a theater educator in Fullerton, and I brought a copy of your critical response process book, which I'd love to talk to you about if you get a chance. But my question is, when you were talking about this hierarchy and flipping the hierarchy on its side, is that what you're talking about here with the audience helping the artist or responding to the artist?
Yeah, so thank you. Once you move the hierarchy sidewise, then there's just so much opportunity for exchange, for learning, for even the question of who holds the knowledge. I'm ridiculous in rehearsals. If somebody brings in, anybody comes in, they bring in their child or something, I'll say, hey, what do you think about that section over there? And they always have good things to say, especially the children. Don't do that. But what you're referencing is something called the critical response process, which is a system of feedback that I developed, it's almost 30 years now, out of just enormous frustration with the fact that we need feedback, but the form in which feedback is coming is so brutal, and often not about you getting better. It was about something else. My being smart or something. And so this system that he's referencing is something I'd love to teach when I come back here in the fall, but it references, there are 3 roles, the artist, the facilitator, and the responders, and it encourages everybody to be in all 3 roles at some time because we all make stuff. You're getting feedback every second. I used to say the second you're born, you're getting feedback, but actually, even before you're born, you're getting feedback. People are talking to you in there, and then you are born and you start crying, and then what happens? How's that touch? What happens? And you're already into the judgment game. It's just like, and this process just works on that. But yes, the possibility for real engagement. And one thing I say about critical response, which may not make sense if you haven't done it, is in dance, you practice steps, but dancing is not about the steps. In critical response process, you practice the steps, but it's not about the steps. It's about a set of values that, like good ritual, that keep you in relationship to things that are hard to keep, especially in moments of urgency, like when you're getting feedback, how to keep those values present. I'd love to talk to you more about it.
How does the artist in you fuel the activist in you, and how does the activist in you fuel the artist?
When I said earlier I wasn't born this way, I kind of was lying. I kind of was. Well, my dad was a labor organizer and a really radical human being. And my mother was kind of an isolationist and loved art. Loved modernism, whispered to me every day, okay, you want to be a dancer, but you're going to have to learn to be alone and separate, and the real romantic images of art. So I often feel like I was just sort of ping-ponging between them. But I think that your question actually is more like when I was saying that if you make this a circle, they're next door to each other. The willfulness of creation is teaching you skills that are not unlike the willfulness of community organizing. In fact, show me a choreographer who's not a community organizer in terms of marshaling the resources and marshaling the people and marshaling, all that. But for me personally, it was just a deep questioning about what we mean by social action and what we mean by art, because I think we narrowed the focus on both of them a lot. Sometimes I'd like to say that with every innovation, there's loss. Like when I go to my synagogue and we do the dancing thing twice a year at my synagogue, someone's favorite prayer is not going to happen because we got to, edit out so we have time to do the stuff that we do together. There's always loss. So I think a lot about if you're going to innovate, you need to partner the loss. And that a lot of the problem with our innovations is that we don't partner the loss. And that's why we get hung up in the shapes that we can't change, because people hang on to the shape. But where I'm getting at is that if you think of partnering loss as a radical act, then, we can turn to nurses and to healers and to all those people and say, that is radical action. And that starts to change the picture of what we mean by change and social change. So my curiosity keeps getting hooked between the two, and they're both really nourishing. The other thing is just the role of listening. I think the commissions for our work are everywhere. There's so much to be done, but our capacity to listen to see what people are saying they need is also a big part of it, including the dancers who are right in front of me. What do they need? Yeah. So maybe I'll just tell you a little bit about being here. The last few minutes we have together. A few years ago, I was in Edinburgh. Actually, it was for critical response. The Scots have really taken to critical response. I was brought there by the puppeteers in the theater community, which I love. They have a huge puppet life in Scotland. But while I was there, I went to the Edinburgh Museum, and there was an exhibit called Witches and Wicked Bodies. And it is 500 years of drawings of witches, starting with Albrecht Dürer, moving through Goya, some of our most famous Western, it was all Western art, many of it by obscure churchmen, a few by women. I don't know, I was shocked. I couldn't get over it. I mean, room after room. And the pictures are pornographic, symbolic, grotesque, and not just old women, although I will say the preponderance of the women were old, but voluptuous young women and, breasts out to here and, just like, you can't imagine. I mean, partly I laughed and partly I was like, I can't. What is the persistence of this imagery? And then when I left, I started thinking, well, every culture has its witches. It's not just the West. What is that? So that's the question that I'm kind of working on. The woman who put it together, this exhibit, it went on to the British Museum. I went to see her the next time I was in England. Her name's Deanna Petherbridge, a name I just love saying, Deanna Petherbridge. It's so British. But she has spent her whole life on this. So I went into her house. She took me upstairs to her studio, this big upstairs space, filled with these pictures of witches. And she informed me that the Edinburgh and British Museum would not let her put some of them in because they were just so horrific. But the other thing she said to me, she was very coy. She met me at the door and she said, now Liz, it's really not 500 years of witches. It's 500 years of misogyny. But the museums wouldn't let her use the word. So I'm really, really interested. I'm in very early stages. I actually put it aside for a while, and then I've brought the piece back, but now I'm at it in earnest, and I have a lot of ideas about it. We spent yesterday, again in class here, it was the first time we did it, but I brought in the drawings, and the dancers I don't know if any of them are here, but they got to embody some of the pictures, and honestly, they give you real permission to do stuff that we've sort of outlawed in art making. That was really kind of fun to get into. Just again, the grotesque faces and the shape of the bodies and the kind of expression that's inherent in them. I have a lot of ideas about how I'm going to approach it, but I thought I would just read to you from something. So I spent a part of today, you guys have a witchcraft library. Do you know that here? You got some of you, yeah. Have anybody here gone to the witchcraft part of the library? Anybody? It's only 2 shelves, but they're really good. I'm not sure how much I think that I will do in this piece. There'll be one historical thing, like a real witch hunt. I thought we should really see what they really are, because they were horrendous. But this is a piece of text. This man it was translated from the French. It's written in the 1570s. He has this amazing introduction to the reader, and it's just so, what's the word? So, not humane isn't the word I want. It's so normal. He goes, when a man's attention is continually engaged with a certain subject, his mind becomes full of it. That's true, mine is full of witches. That often forms the design of his opinions. That's also true. Artists do that. We live with this stuff for years. For while I was nearly 15 years continuously conducting the trials of criminals, my mind was entirely filled with a monstrous assembly of witches. Their banquetings, their dancing, charms, spells, their jumping, journeying through the air, their practices of carnal relations with the demon and the devil, they're forever transforming into different shapes. And then you get to the bottom of this page, and there's a little box, and then in red print, in a very nice, clear font, drawn from the capital trials of 900 persons, more or less, who within the last 15 years have in Lorraine paid the penalty of death for the crime of witchcraft. You know, it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women, mostly women, not entirely, killed. And then what you see, and you know, it's just the relationship between the government, the legal, the laws, the oppression of the whole deal onto the backs of these women. There's another section I was going to read you, but I won't now, just that they were apparently associated with the imps. And then he lists, not this book, another book, all the imps. Here are the imps that were going to get you lined up to be a witch. So if you were seen with a cat, a dog, a flea, a toad, a frog, a mouse, a crow, a raven, you know, it's just a list of every living thing that might, you know, cross your path. So there is something about it. It's really fascinating. I got to spend time today with one of your faculty who's helping me understand about voodoo, because as I said, every culture has its witches, and where the power is and how that's worked out. A lot of questions. Among the things I'm thinking about is, so you remember the Wicked Witch of the West, how she didn't like water? Do you remember? She was afraid of melting. I think it's actually generational trauma, because they drowned so many of these women. It just passed on down through. Why would any person want? I mean, drowning was one of the ways, you probably all know this, that they tested whether a person was a witch or not. So I'm thinking that maybe there'll be a section a little bit like the fairy tales, where there's, remember in Sleeping Beauty and all that, they come and they give a little gift of something. So there might be a witch of forgiveness, or the witch of whiteness, or the witch of mistake making. I'm in that stage, just like that guy wrote, that every time I hear a story, I think, oh my God, this could be a witch. I was at a party, and a man from Gore-Tex, pretty high up in the Gore-Tex thing, was there, and he was telling me how if you have a hole in your heart, it used to be they would take your heart out, fix it, and put it back in. You had a 10% chance of making it. But now, because of Gore-Tex, they put the Gore-Tex in. He didn't tell me how, but somehow I pictured like the Gore-Tex like fills up your heart and you're saved. And I asked him, who had that idea at Gore-Tex? How did you? And I really grilled him. Was it a group? Was it? Because I'm thinking, oh, maybe there's a contemporary healer, a woman, a witch, who figured this out. That's where I was going. I didn't tell him that. He finally said, why are you asking me this? And then I did tell him. I said, well, I'm working on a piece about witches. He goes, you are. And then he's like, moves in, and he goes, don't tell anybody. He said, that's really interesting. He said, that's intellectual property, be careful. So it's funny who's interested, but it did get me thinking about, yes, I want to acknowledge midwifery and the healers, because so many of the women, that's where they're caught in this. but also what are the contemporary stories now? And not necessarily, I mean the Wicca, who are out and about and probably here in the theater tonight, but also really thinking about what healing actually, back to that word healing. So it's very interesting. Tomorrow's going to be fascinating with some wonderful faculty coming to talk about this. I admit to some serious problems with the project. I'm unclear about the role of gender right now. Is it only women? Is it trans? Is it lesbians? Is it what role? What is this? Is this the difference between how to work that out? I'm really interested in the question of representation. Yes, every culture may have its witches, but who gets to say that and when and how? It's going to be really interesting to work through. I'm very interested in who becomes witches. Do you know, in most of the fairy tales, again, across cultures, they're widows, they're stepmothers, they're troubled girls. So I'm hoping to work in communities, have a widows and stepmothers and troubled girls group, and see what we can make together. And maybe we'll make a dance, and there'll be a point in the piece where everybody comes out soaking wet, 100 of us or something like that. So there's a long way ahead, but if you're interested, I hope you'll stay connected with it. I want to do one last thing, and sort of addressing this more personally. I was asked recently about the sort of the sexual assault question in our field, and I said there were two things that were sort of on my mind about it. One is it's not just the sexual assault or even the sexual harassment. It's the intellectual and mental harassment that bothered me the most. And that I hope eventually we'll be able to move to understand more about what that has been like and what that's like. And the other thing is that when I started the Dance Exchange, yes, I wanted artistic freedom, but that is not the only reason I started the Dance Exchange. I wanted a place to thrive. And I think so many of the women of my generation in dance started our companies because that was the only way we could thrive. I don't mean it was sexual harassment. I mean it was intellectual harassment, mental harassment, arrogance about who had access to you during just a technique class and the kinds of things that certain people felt they could say to you. So perhaps you'd let me end with, this is a blog I wrote a little bit ago. It's unpublished. I haven't put it out yet. We have a new website, and we haven't figured out how to put everything all together yet, but I think I'm also waiting, because I'm not sure when to put it out. But perhaps it's a personal reflection as to how come I'm coming around to Wicked Bodies. As a young artist, I used to get so tired of telling people what I did as a profession and have the leering begin. I could pretty much count on lewd comments, a change of where the man I was talking to might look at me, moving his eyes from my face to my chest or crotch, and certainly some satisfaction in their countenance for having the right to do this, as I was merely a dancer. I began to work hard on desexualizing my encounters. I must have succeeded, because I had a lighting designer say to me when I was still in my 20s, "You're the most asexual woman I have ever worked with." I took it as a compliment. I didn't entirely stay away from sex as a theme in my work. In 1974, the solo piece I made called New York City Winter was a story of my go-go dancing days. I did that form of dancing to pay for my technique classes during the 9 months I lived in the East Village. I also danced at the bars because I was trying to figure out how to have a relationship with an audience. You could call it an early form of immersive art making. I learned a lot, up close, lots of conversation, and so many opinions. In the solo, I premiered at a poetry series at St. Mark's Church. I couldn't get it into one of the dance series because I was talking, and at that time, talking and dancing didn't go together. I eventually, in the solo, I take off the ridiculous white fur coat that I'm wearing, to reveal my body clothed in the actual go-go costume I had made for the job. Yeah, I used to make all my clothes. I customized it for this performance by cutting out one of the bra cups so that one breast was revealed. After putting on my makeup while telling stories about my grandmother and Martha Graham, I step onto the chair or the bar, and I paint a little happy face on my exposed breast. And then I say, "I think we're ready now," in a very chipper voice. And then the so-called wild go-go dancing begins, except I'm not very good at it. In the performance, I reenact my very own surprise about what excites the audiences in the bars. It turns out that turning around and bending over with your butt up is kind of a showstopper in a really good way. I began to discover that excellence might depend on context. I write all this today in part because of the daily revelations of men of my generation going down for sexual harassment. Harvey Weinstein, Leon Wieseltier, and today, Mark Halperin. It's an amazing thing to observe. I'm a bit glad for the future, but I'm quite sad about the past. What might I have been like, and where would I have ventured as an artist if I hadn't felt those constraints on a daily basis? I mean, I love my work. I love what I've made. I'm joyful with my stubbornness to stick with narrative, to work through storytelling, to combine the world of the body with so many other worlds. I don't regret any of it. But I do wonder this morning if my intellectual and thoroughly conceptual bent was in part a way out, an escape from the harassment. A formidable way of saying, see me, see us, we're more than our bodies, even as I built my life with my body as central. So, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.